So 1-3,
Yep.
1,030 effective.
Uh-huh.
The hijack raises to 15.
Okay.
The cutoff flats, and then the hero on the button makes it 65 with ace five of clubs.
On button with ace of clubs, five of clubs. So good little squeeze spot with your hand, right?
Yeah, it's basically always a three bet, correct?
I mean, I would probably play. It's just two blinds, right?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, I mean, I could see overflatting maybe an earlier position raiser in a call. I mean, you can definitely have some flats on the button, but it's usually going to be heads up. You just get laid too much of a price not to squeeze in a spot where people just VPIP too wide. And if it's a home game, I'm sure that's the case, right?
Yeah, and the only thing with the three bet was, the players that they usually calling, so they're going to call the original raise, and
Uh
then,
huh.
if the original raiser calls, they're just going to call getting a
Right.
good price. So that was the only reason I kind of thought maybe don't do it. But yeah,
I
generally
still
I
think
would do
ace
this.
five is like that good primary bluff hand, but that is a good point that you make where you might in some cases pull it back just a tad and go more value heavy and start to throw in some cusps either as a fold or an overcall, but still with stack depth though, a double flat like from the middle is such a collapsed range and people don't know how to play that range because as I've said many times in this show before, like they're actually forced to defend down more and they're just really looking at their own hand. So if you get a board that's like high, I mean, my God, like you can just like if a guy wants to play, 1,000 Aussie dollars, stack a hand with like king nine as king top pair or like ace six as an ace top pair, then more power to them. But it's kind of a collapsed range. But okay, so you three bet to 65 on the button with ace five of clubs. Okay.
The blinds fold, and
Mm-hmm.
then both villains call.
Okay, so hijack and cutoff call. So it looks like the pot's maybe like 200 or something, right?
Yeah, pot's basically 200. Yep.
Okay. Yep.
And the flop comes four of clubs, seven of spades, seven of diamonds.
Four of clubs, seven of spades, seven of diamonds. So you've got a couple little backdoor things going on here. I would probably, I assume it's going to get checked to you. I would probably see bet this board more often than not. Again, this is again the situation where if you can get through, again, it's a home game. But here's the theory of multi-way c betting, and if you can, the hijack has to defend less here. He's the initial opener, right? Because you got a guy behind him. If you get through that hijack, you can make this guy in the cutoff's life just absolutely miserable, right? Like on disconnected high cards, if he just calls as a double flatter. And usually these guys will raise off trips or like a boat or something by the end. Some guys will trap, but that's kind of putting the whole thing as to why you even squeeze this hand because it could get into a real gold scenario.
Yeah, I agree with that. The player that also overcalled, yeah, he does play his hand sort of face up, so I did know that going into the hand.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that, so yeah, I did see bet, and I bet 70 into 200. I'm not sure what you think of the sizing there, but
So check
that's what I
check
did.
70.
Yeah, check
Yeah,
check
I think it's
70
fine.
into 200.
Yeah, I think it's fine.
Yeah.
One third. I mean, you could even get
And
away with going smaller to 60, but okay, 70. Yep.
so the original raiser calls, so the
Okay.
hijack calls, and the overcaller on the cutoff folds.
All right. So that call is going to be stronger, right, than the cutoff
Yeah.
if he was if he was if the cutoff had defended with the other guy. So, what kind of range do we think that this guy had? He probably has a lot of pocket pairs here, right? And then maybe he's sandbagging like a forceful or a seven once in a while, right?
Yeah, and I'm not sure if I got cut off before when I was saying it, but this player in particular is a full-time poker player, one of my close friends. So we have a lot of history together.
Oh, okay.
So I do
Didn't you
I
tell
do
didn't you
know a
tell
bit.
me it was your roommate or something?
Yeah, it is my roommate. Yeah,
That adds into this
it's
though. I remember this hand though. Okay, so uh your buddy calls and the cutoff folds and the pot is 340, right?
yeah. So 340 to a turn
Uh-huh.
of the eight of diamonds.
So backdoor diamonds are out there for the podcast people. It's four of clubs, seven of spades, seven of diamonds, eight of diamonds. Hero has ace five of clubs. So you turn a gut shot now.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
and it checks to me. So I was thinking for a little bit about this spot, and obviously I agree with you in terms of the pocket pairs. That he has probably more pocket pairs than any sort of hand. Slow playing, a boat every now and then. He
Uh-huh.
also can slow play hands like jacks and stuff like that. Even though it would have been three ways, he would have known that. He thinks he probably has an advantage over the overcaller. So he does have some slow plays there. Probably not aces and kings, but maybe queens once in a while,
Mm-hmm.
and jacks through to nines, I would say as well.
Yeah, this one's really close here because there's a couple of things that I think you would want to consider. And again, this is one where even if, you know, you don't necessarily play like this, it could be like a good computer exercise. But again, it's multi-way, so it's hard to get a lot of accurate sort of solutions. But it's you pick up your backdoor and you block 5-6. That's kind of what's going on for you here too on the turn. The other thing that I would think about though on the flip side is how would you play the rest of your range? Like, what do you think? If you had aces, kings, queens, would you always be betting here on the turn in this exact configuration of when next act calls in a three-way three-bet pot?
Yeah, that's actually a great point because I was thinking about this hand after, and I think some of the time with like aces through to jacks, I probably would check back. So um, it might have been a bit of a spot where my bluffs are betting and my heavy values kind of checking, which probably isn't the best for me. But thinking about that now, I think it's probably a better board for the original Razor, or he's obviously got all the sevens, most of the
Mm-hmm.
sevens, the 5-6, the pocket eights, and stuff like that. So,
Yeah, you might have eights, but
yeah,
you might overcall with four. I mean, you could be just playing this as 100% three bet for a VPIP where, if you're doing it direct suited connectors, eights, I don't know, fours would be that far down. Just the only other thing too that I would say is that there's some merit for sometimes betting to allow you to make a larger bet at the end, but this is no limit. So if you don't have it in you to really make very, very large overbets and no limit, then there's some merit for kind of spiking the pot up in a given situation where you're going to run three barrels, meaning that you're betting here to make the pot larger. That's going to lead to a larger river bet. You don't have to do that. It's no limit. I don't know when the last time anybody played pot limit, Hold'em, right? And but if it was pot limit, that would have some merit. Pot limit Omaha has some of these spots here too, and I've been playing a lot of pot limit double board in a given on Poker Bros too. So pot limit's a little bit interesting like that, because you can only bet the size of the pot. It's no limit though. So if you do have some large overbets in your repertoire, you don't always have to bet turn. You can blast on favorable rivers here too. I would probably tend to check back here a lot is kind of what my thinking is, especially if I was playing against somebody that I thought was good that could make my life hell if I had overpairs and I got raised on the turn.
okay, yeah, it's probably. I'm reading a little bit of the chat too, and then it makes sense. I am probably checking more of my aces through to queens here, and obviously bluffing now. I'm betting, so maybe a little bit of unbalanced play from me. But I did actually bet, and I don't know if you're going to like this sizing, but I did bet 225 into 350.
So you go 2/3.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, most of the time in these spots, like the turn is either 1/3 or like 2/3 to full pot. You don't usually see it reflected. I would just start to think of what hand calls the flop that folds the turn. Or are you trying to like juice the pot up here?
well, I was basically looking at my stack, and I was betting a size where I can jam
So you
about
were you were just trying to
80%
juice
pot.
up the pot and then just like lay across pretty much any river. Is that the idea here?
Yeah, that was in my head, and I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but I had a chat to him after the hand the day later, and we were kind of agreeing where I'm only really doing this play against him because he's the only person capable of folding a hand like potentially jacks by the river or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
where most players get sticky with those overpairs. So I'm sort of bluffing the better players, which I don't know if it's a smart idea, but you can't be bluffing too much people that don't fold as well. So that's kind of my thought process anyway.
I would just say that just go back to what I said before too. It's an interesting. I mean, I haven't necessarily talked about it all that much, but if you can imagine a scenario where you have like full access to your bet slider in a situation where you might check back over pairs on the turn here, and on brick rivers, really, really use a large overbet sizing. Like it looks like you guys have about what 800 left. So let's just say that just because you don't bet the turn. If you bet the river, your size is going to be all in.
Okay.
It adds some complexity to the game. You see what I'm saying? Like it's not necessarily a super common line, but it definitely has some merit because you sort of are inside that stack depth where it's not just insane. You know what I mean? Here, when you bet 225, if he calls, the pot will be like, right around 800, and it looks like you guys will have like right around 700 left, less than 700, something like that.
Yeah, about
Yeah,
665. I
yeah.
have down in my notes.
Okay, so you bet 225.
And the villain calls.
So 450, now it's like 790. Okay.
Yeah. And the river is an interesting one. It comes the ace of spades.
Yep.
Obviously checks to me again. And once again, maybe a little bit of ego being my roommate and all my mates around. But obviously, for most people and definitely most villains, I would be checking this 100%, taking my showdown.
Mm-hmm.
However, against him, I know he's capable of making some very big hero calls. And just the kind of read I got off, not read, but the way he played the hand and everything, I was kind of putting him on either a monster like forceful, eights full potentially, something like that. Obviously, having more sevens doesn't help me at all, but I also thought he can have a lot of the fives, sixes, eights. No, sorry, not eights, nines, tens, jacks,
Mm-hmm.
and I know that he knows going for very thin value with an ace here would be basically suicide for most players.
Mm-hmm.
So that is why I actually did shove all in as a very, very, very thin value bet.
For what, 660 or so?
662 or 665, something around there as
So
well.
let me, yeah, I actually wrote back to you in this hand because I thought it was so interesting. I think that you and I both agree that in most cases this would not be the right play, right? Now,
Correct.
given that your background though, I really actually don't mind this play because of sort of the dynamic that you might have in this particular situation and the fact that you're obviously making it look like you're bluffing and you're up against somebody that might sort of know what you're trying to do. Whereas your normal live player, I think this would be a huge, huge punt. Now, I think there's one very, very important thing to note here too. And that is like, and obviously we just talked about how you might check through the turn with overpairs, but the only difference here between having, say, like kings and queens and your hand being ace five is that there's less combinations of your opponent running into an ace. And I think I remember I said this to you in the email. What I find the most interesting part of this is that if your roommate is structuring correctly, he shouldn't really be able to run into an ace here. Like my first inclination was that this would suck if you're value owning yourself against like some ace, but because that guy calls behind him, he really isn't supposed to have an ace here at all. You know what I mean? Like it's even hard for him to like call. I mean, I guess like maybe like ace queen suited with a backdoor or something like that. But even still with a guy behind him, it's pretty difficult to call. So it's interesting if you jam ace five here and if you played kings or queens here, would you do the same thing?
Yes, I think thinking about it now again, I definitely think against only this villain, I would go for value with kings and queens, which he would obviously think is not optimal and therefore potentially call very light, which is the reason I did it.
By the way,
I'm
even
not sure
ace
if you agree
four,
with that,
somebody in
King.
the live chat said ace four. I don't think that, I mean, ace four with a guy behind you, it's still pretty dicey because you can't really improve, right? I mean, you can improve to an ace or a four, but you've got the upper pair. It's not like peeling. It's kind of the equivalent to like, you're not going to peel with what is middle or bottom pair in a 3-bet pot with a guy behind you, right? If you're your opponent, if you're your roommate on the flop, even to 1/3, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, and I agree with that.
yeah. No, I mean, I actually don't mind the play given this dynamic. I just think that you should realize that this is definitely kind of non-standard, right? You
Yeah,
are
no,
banking on the fact that your opponent might actually over bluff catch here, I think.
Yeah, and the dynamic. Obviously, it's a friend. We're all friends, and it's a good home game. A lot of action and stuff. But me and him obviously play fairly often, and we play against each other fairly often, so we know how each other plays.
And one last thing too that
And
somebody in the live chat brings up too is that I would also want to I would want to know how capable your opponent is of sort of just like giving you rope. Like, is he just going to trap the whole way down? Is he going to recognize the board that might be good for 3 barrels and just let you blast off if he did flop force full, if he did have 7x, if he did turn 8s full, if he did turn 5-6 suited, you know?
he is that player. He would slow play, which
Then
probably makes
then
this
it's
even a worse.
then
But
it
yeah,
gets more dicey then it really gets more dicey because he's going to end up with, because you're playing this like he has like an unprotected sort of range. You're playing this like he's got a weak range, when in fact if he protects his strong hands well, then it becomes very, very dicey.
yeah, and with the effective stacks only being, obviously it's pretty deep for the game, but with the bet on the turn, he doesn't need to raise and shove all in on the turn, obviously. So he knows that I'm probably shoving most rivers if I'm going for it on the turn. So if he did have, quads or a boat, he would definitely slow play, yes.
So what ended up happening? So you went 665
And he tanked for about 7 minutes and finally called. And he had pocket fives.
wow, that's
Yes. So
crazy.
blocked 5-6 for the straight.
And again, this is one of these situations where, like I said, sometimes it's hard because it's a three-way pot. It's interesting sometimes to go to the computer to look for solutions about which combos are supposed to be called in a given scenario, what suits are supposed to be called. It's I don't think that this is a brag call. I think it's an interesting hand. It is. You were definitely right on thinking that your opponent thought you were full of shit, right, with this run out. I just would really want you to like. I would really like to know if you would ever have kings or queens played this way as a bet on turn and jam on river with ace x. It's sort of like if you don't, once in a while, if I was your opponent, I might be like, what the fuck is this guy doing? Like, he just picked up like the best right brick card in the world. What would scare me though is you're continuing to barrel on the turn, and your bluffs would probably have to consist of Broadway diamonds if you're structuring correctly, which picked up the back door. Jack 10 of diamonds, Jack 9 of diamonds, something like that, 9-10 of diamonds, something like that.
Yeah, and I was definitely going to make this play either way, depending. Like the river could have been most cards, and I probably would have shoved as a bluff. I'm not sure it would have got through, but in his eyes, the ace is such a brick because I'm never doing this with, ace king. I mean, maybe like ace king of diamonds, but yeah, no, I would play that the same way. But he probably thinks that any ace is too thin for value, which is why I'm kind of just like against him in particular. I'm just going to go for it. And if he's not slow playing, I know that I'm probably good. And he's most likely, because he's capable of making light calls. If he's not slow playing a monster, then I'm probably going to win the hand and win a big pot.
I appreciate the call, Jackson. Thank you very much, and please don't get offended by the a thumbnail for this particular call that might be a little bit, let me see, a
That's
little
okay. Go for
bombastic.
it.
I might use.
That's okay.
Okay.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Bart.